Hi there, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for this webinar about violence against pets in the context of intimate partner violence and supporting victim survivors. I'm Dr. Jasmine B. MacDonald. I'm a research fellow here at the Australian Institute of Family Studies, or aifs, and part of the team that created our policy and practice paper describing what we currently know from the evidence about the relationship between intimate partner violence and violence against family animals. The group of presenters in this webinar pay our respects to the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to lands and waters. We pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders past and present. Here in Naarm, where the aifs team is based, the traditional owners of country are the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Bunurong Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nations. Okay. I am going to dive into some housekeeping for us today, and you can eagerly anticipate meeting our three fantastic panelists. At the end of the webinar, there'll be a live Q&A. So we'll speak for about 40, 45 minutes, something like that. Then we'll have questions coming throughout the webinar that'll come up on my screen with some support from amazing folks on the back end. And in our last 10 to 15 minutes, we'll start answering some of those questions. So you have, our audience has a questions box in the GoToWebinar dashboard. If you want to write some questions for us, please do that. And our webinar today is recorded. That means that you'll be able to watch it again in another couple of weeks when it's released on the website. And you can also share it with other people that you think might be interested. In your dashboard for GoToWebinar, you'll also find a link for a handout of additional resources for today and also for the bios of our presenters within the webinar. We can't cover all the most important points or all of the resources, and so we've put together a resource sheet to stimulate your thinking and to do a little bit of further research and reading about the issues that we'll cover today. Right at the end of the webinar, when it closes up and we're finished, there's going to be a feedback survey that will pop up for you. We genuinely appreciate your time and feedback with that survey. That helps us refine the content that we create and the way that we approach webinars. So please consider taking the time to provide feedback there. The content for today requires a sensitive content warning. It includes information about intimate partner violence and violence against animals. And across the content that we've linked to, but also in the discussion today, this means potentially aspects of sexual, physical, and psychological abuse. The group of presenters cover a broad range of experiences and perspectives, including experience of lived experience through domestic violence. So that's just a heads up to keep checking in with yourself, being kind to yourself. If one of the beauties of having a recorded webinar is that it's something you can visit later, so take the space that you might need today and come back to the content later. And in addition, if you think you might like some additional support and contacts to reach out to, we've got some team today who are going to put in the chat some information for you to reach out to, some support information there. Okay, so this webinar has been created as part of the Child Family Community Australia webinar program. And we create resources for practitioners who support families and children. And we do a bunch of stakeholder engagement and try to find out from people supporting children and families across the country, what are the topics that are most relevant to their work. And then we go away and do a bunch of nerdy research to create resources that are going to be useful to work out evidence that will inform practice. And in the last couple of years, a topic that was really important coming through from our audience was coercive control and family domestic sexual violence more broadly. And we consulted quite widely for that evidence package, and we spoke to peak bodies, we spoke to researchers, we spoke to practitioners, and out of that created a range of resources relating to technology facilitated coercive control, to reproductive coercion and abuse. And one of the messages that we kept hearing from stakeholders was that it's important to consider family animals and pets in this process as well. And that was something that really stood out as unique to us, and an area with relatively low levels of awareness and some gaps in supports for victim survivors. So in response to audience feedback and this identified need for increased awareness, we undertook a rapid literature review and developed a policy and practice paper for people working with children and families. And so the first member of our group today that I'll introduce is Kylie Butler, who was the lead researcher on that paper. Welcome, Kylie.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I've been a researcher at aifs for about 2 years now, and I've got a background in social policy. I've also got quite a few years experience researching into human-animal interactions, and I've worked in greyhound rescue in the past as well. So yeah, I care really deeply about issues that affect families, and I'm particularly interested in research about family, domestic and sexual violence and how to improve supports for people experiencing this. And I'm also really interested in anything to do with that human-animal bond and people's relationships with animals and animal welfare. So yeah, as Jazz said, we did a review of the literature about the relationship between violence against family animals and intimate partner violence last year. And we put together a publication for practitioners, and the aim of that publication was to describe what this relationship between animal abuse in the home and intimate partner violence is, why it's something that's really important for us to be aware of, and to help better understand the impacts of violence against animals in an intimate partner violence context, and what can be done to strengthen support for people experiencing this. So I feel like today's a really great opportunity to bring together some of that research background with the knowledge and research and experience that Jen and Monique bring from their work directly in this space. And it's really special to be on this panel with Jen and Monique.
Lovely. Thanks, Kylie. Our second group member in today's discussion is Jen Howard. Jen's the founder and CEO of Safe Pets, Safe Families, a charity founded in 2013. As often is the case, the concept of Safe Pets, Safe Families was born out of Jen's own life experience, being a beloved pet owner and living through domestic violence. Jen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. So I founded Safe Pets, Safe Families after I experienced domestic violence myself. So I had to flee to a DV shelter with my kids, and I couldn't take my dogs with me, and I had tried to reach out to like friends and family, and no one could help me. And I was putting myself at risk every day going back to the property to feed my dogs, and I was paying rent at the DV shelter and paying rent at the house that I fled from. And I guess I could only do that for so long until the lease ran out, and my dogs ended up at the pound and likely euthanized. And my dogs were I had them since puppies, and they were 8 years old at the time, and I had them for 3 years before I had my children, and they were my children's first best friends as well. And so it really broke me, and I didn't want anyone else to experience what I did. So I founded what I thought was going to be a low-key foster program, and I could never foresee how huge this the need was. And there was such a sinister side to it as well after I'd done some research. And so that's me.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks for creating the service that you needed so that you could support other folks. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today. And our third group member today is Monique Dam. Monique is the CEO of Lucy's Project, a national charity that aims to improve the safety of people and animals experiencing domestic and family violence. Lucy's Project collaborates across sectors, advocates for policy, program and legislative change, promotes research and delivers education for workers. Thanks, Mon.
Thank you so much, Jazz. Hi, everyone. My name is Monique, and I've been the CEO at Lucy's Project for just over 6 months. Previously, when I worked at the organisation, I led a cross-sector capacity building program. My background is in policy and advocacy, and I've worked at Domestic Violence New South Wales as the Advocacy and Prevention Manager, and in the New South Wales and Commonwealth governments on early childhood and legal assistance policy. So I first learned about the issue of domestic and family violence perpetrated against animals while I was working at DV New South Wales. And I realised quite quickly that this issue is often overlooked and made invisible, even though it impacts on so many women, children and animals. And this is why at Lucy's project, we're passionate about building a shared understanding across sectors that the safety and well-being of people and animals is interconnected, and how to adopt an animal inclusive framework when responding to domestic and family violence. Next week, we're holding a conference with over 30 speakers, including Kylie and Jazz, and we'd love you to join us. In November, December and January, we're offering free education sessions to practitioners on how to recognise, respond and refer people and animals experiencing domestic and family violence. So you can find the links to register in the chat box and the handout as well.
Lovely, thanks Monique. How nice is it to be able to point to the next relevant event for folks who are here and interested? That's fantastic. I'll thank each of you for making the time to have a chat today. To start off, I was wondering if we could think about a description of what we're focusing on today. What does violence against family animals in an intimate partner violence context look like? And to start with, I think I'll throw to you, Kylie, to provide some research context.
No worries. I think this is it's a good place to start, because it's really important that we have an understanding of what exactly we're talking about when we say violence against family animals in an intimate partner violence context. So throughout the research literature, there was no one super clear, consistent definition. And I think that's because intimate partner violence related violence against animals can play out really differently from one situation to another. But what we're talking about is when a perpetrator uses violence or threats of violence against a family animal with the intention of intimidating, manipulating, or controlling their partner. So this can look like things like a perpetrator abusing a family animal as a threat or demonstration of what might happen if their partner doesn't comply with the perpetrator's demands. It can look like a perpetrator harming a family pet because they're jealous of the relationship that their partner has with the pet and the attention that the pet gets. It can also look like controlling behaviors that tie in with things like financial and emotional abuse. So things such as withholding money for vet care, not letting someone feed or provide adequate shelter for the pet. And the perpetrator might do this with the knowledge that it's going to cause a lot of stress and anxiety to their partner, and restrict that, their freedom to care for the animal in the way that they would like to or need to. So these are some of the common examples that came up in the literature a lot. What we're seeing from all these examples is that it's an example of power, control, and coercion that perpetrators use where both people and family animals are subject to abuse. So the perpetrators leveraging these emotional connections that people have with their pets and using animals as a tool in intimate partner violence. I'd also just quickly like to mention here that there are some limitations to the research evidence, and it is an emerging area of research. So the majority of the studies we looked at focused on experiences within heterosexual relationships where the male was the perpetrator and the female was the victim survivor. Within these studies, the animals most commonly focused on were your common family pets such as dogs and cats. But I really want to highlight that intimate partner violence related violence against animals can occur in all types of relationships, and that any animal that people have a relationship with, that people feel that close connection to, whether it's big or small, can be targeted. This is something that's starting to be recognised more broadly. So the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children now includes animal abuse in their definition of coercive control.
Thanks, Kylie. Really appreciate that context and to be thinking about some of the limitations with research as well, which is the beauty of having a diverse panel today to add to that. Absolutely. So, Jen, if I could invite you next to talk about what the problem that we're talking about here, what it looks like.
So, I guess I just want to highlight the importance of animal-human bond and in situations. And I remember from my own experience when things were becoming unsafe and sort of volatile, and I can remember that my dogs were in the same room as my kids, and so my kids were like very upset and scared, and my dogs would be right there with them, upset and scared as well. And even sometimes when I was like maybe in the aftermath, like I'd be on the couch crying and my dogs would be there as well. And like, so it's the importance of like animals in victim survivors of domestic violence that most of the time, like, these pets are there for everything. You can tell your darkest secrets to them, you can cry to them, you can share everything. And it's just like, I guess, like, people, like, it's proven time and time again that women will delay leaving because of their pets. And so if you want to care about animals, you need to care about people, and if you want to care about people, you need to care about pets. And I think it's so important to recognize the link and how strong that bond is, and sort of to be able to support people leaving.
It's really really practical, important things to keep in mind that you've mentioned there, Jen, especially because not all the practitioners who are working with families will necessarily have had that experience of a bond themselves with a family pet. You know, it's not something that all people have. So being able to take that perspective of what it does mean when you have that bond, and that's really powerful. And to, you know, you talk about that psychological, emotional connection, and how you mentioned like holding on the couch afterwards, that physical comfort that comes from animals as well. It's really powerful. Monique, I'll throw to you. Other aspects that you might like to add in describing what the problem is and what violence against animals in this context looks like?
Does. And thank you, Jen, for sharing. So we know that domestic and family violence perpetrated against animals and people can include physical violence, sexual violence, psychological and emotional abuse, and also neglect. And today our discussion will be focused on family animals, who we often refer to as companion animals or pets, and intimate partner violence. But it's really important to keep in mind that perpetrators will use violence against animals as a way to harm and control children and young people too. And another thing to be aware of is that domestic and family violence is also perpetrated against assistants, farmed and wild animals. And this has specific impacts on people with disability and people living in outer metropolitan and rural and regional areas as well. So for instance, the Rapid Review report that was recently released includes a case study of a woman with disability whose partner coerced and forced her to have sex with him by repeatedly using and threatening physical violence against her assistance dog. The National Risk Assessment Principles also recognise that cruelty and harm against animals can indicate the risk of future or more severe violence, and is often used as a control tactic by perpetrators. Earlier this year, it was so devastating to learn of the alleged murder of Molly Ticehurst, and to learn that her 12-week-old puppy was allegedly killed by her former partner in the weeks prior to her death. And this is why it's so important to take animals' abuse seriously as a high-risk factor.
Thank you, Monique. Yeah, and seeing this kind of abuse, or this aspect of family, domestic, and sexual violence as an indicator of the likelihood of further violence and escalation of violence it's a really important point that you make there. And I want to pick up on something that Jen, you just raised. You know, one of the key findings from the review, and as you've emphasized just now, is that fear and concern for the safety of animals can lead women who are experiencing family, domestic, and sexual violence to stay with perpetrators, to delay leaving, or have the need to return to a violent situation. So I think it'd be really nice if we could unpack that a little bit and think about some of the barriers and issues here. I might start with you first, Kylie, if that's okay.
Sure. So yeah, this was something that came up in the research time and time again. So the majority of the research that we looked at involved qualitative studies, so a lot of surveys and interviews with either women that had access to domestic and family violence services or practitioners working with them. and the studies were from a range of locations, so mostly Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and the USA. And in all of these, almost all of these studies and across all of these locations, one of the impacts that came up really, really often was that, as Jen just mentioned, people who had experienced intimate partner violence where family animals were also harmed said that they often stayed with, delayed leaving, or returned to perpetrators because of fears for the safety of their family animals. And with this, we see those physical, psychological, and emotional impacts all interacting with each other. So the fact that people are staying with, delaying leaving, or returning to perpetrators highlights some of those practical challenges. So we already know that leaving a violent relationship is a really dangerous time, and when you add animals into the mix, that can increase the complexity of doing so. There's things around logistics, transport for animals, caring for animals, the increased cost of having animals to look after as well, and questions such as where can people find safe accommodation where they can bring their pets, or even temporary accommodation for pets while something more long-term is sorted out where they can all be together again. And this speaks to people's real fears that it's not safe to leave family animals behind. So there's a lot of examples in the research where animals that have been left with perpetrators have been subject to increased violence as a way to punish the victim survivor for leaving or to try and force them to return. And another point here is that even when that risk of physical violence is lower, women are often the primary caregivers of animals, so that risk of neglect can increase if the animals are left behind as well. And something that underpins this is that importance of the relationship between people and pets that we've already spoken a little bit to, so that comfort, support, and friendship. But these are things that go both ways. So we know that animals are really dependent on us for their basic and emotional needs, but we're also quite dependent on them in that relationship as well. So if you think about all these things, it's quite understandable that, for a lot of people, it's not an option to leave without family animals, and that if there isn't any other option but to do so, this is really distressing, and it can be really detrimental to the safety and recovery of both people and pets. It's also worth, just as a final point to mention here, that one thing that also comes up a lot in the research is that victim survivors who experience more severe intimate partner violence can be the most reluctant to leave family animals behind, because the risk of violence towards the animals in these cases is often really, really high in their absence.
Thanks, Kylie. Jen, could I throw to you next to add to those points and share from a kind of practical situation with the women and the families that you work with, that barrier to leaving dangerous situations?
Yeah, it's so common. We deal with it on a daily basis of just recently there was one client that was driving 40 minutes a day from the shelter back to feed a cat at the property, and we've just got there's so many examples that I could use, but it's so many people get I guess that's the risk of people returning as well, because the perpetrator will sort of say, if you don't return, this is what will happen to your animals, and or we'll just leave your animal on the street, or all sorts of things happen. I guess for us as an organisation that provides temporary fostering for animals and things like that, some of the things that could help in those situations is better being prepared. So if there's if you've got a client that you're that sort of planning to leave, just things like getting their animals desexed or microchipped or vaccinated or things like that makes a huge difference into fostering or even boarding animals, because obviously there's not enough shelters that are pet friendly and to be able to take animals to. So a lot of the times when people need to go into motel accommodation or when they need to temporarily foster the animals, it's so important to sort of help get better their chances at getting fostering, I guess. And in SA, we're not obviously nationally, but in SA we do have lots of resources that can help with these sorts of things. So anyone that's listening that's in SA, obviously you can reach out to us to get these practical sort of supports in place.
Lovely, thank you, Jen. Mon, could I throw to you next to add to the discussion?
So for many women and children, their families or their animals are family to them, and their animals may be their safe place and a source of unconditional love. And so for women and children who are experiencing violence, it's important for us as practitioners to remove the barriers to their safety. And as Kylie and Jen have both highlighted, one of the biggest barriers is not being able to find a safe home together. We know many women delay leaving a perpetrator because they have very real and legitimate fears their animals are going to be harmed or killed if they leave them. So for this reason, some women will choose to live out of their cars with their children and animals until they can find a safe home. This is why it's so essential for women to be invited to share any concerns they might have about their children and animals, and for those concerns to be listened to and validated by the workers that they engage with. It can be quite disempowering for women if they're told that they must leave their animals to seek safety for them and their children. And when women and children are forced to be separated from their animals, this can create additional anxiety, grief, and trauma as well. And by contrast, if women and children and their animals are supported to stay together, this can support their healing and recovery journey. And this is really why we think it's so critical to provide support to women and children with animals that does respond to their specific needs.
Thank you, Mon. Okay, I'm wondering if you don't mind, team. I want to go a little bit off script. We don't have a script today, but this is how I give you a heads up. I'm going to ask you something you might not have anticipated me asking you. I'm wondering if you might be able to share your sense of how well acknowledged or aware of this issue folks might be in different contexts. So I might throw to you first, Jen, and then to you, Mon, if you don't mind. Jen, do you think this is a problem people are aware of, especially in, I guess, family support services?
I guess in like SA, like I do feel like I've got a lot of contact with a lot of the DV services here, and it definitely comes up. But in some of the other, like I have come across some client feedback from different places where they'll sort of be very stressed on the phone and things, and saying that like their housing officer sort of said, like, just get rid of the pets type thing, or yeah, it's sort of I don't think everyone, like so many people are aware of it. We still, when we're out in like in events and at public events and things, it's still, people say like all the time, like, wow, I never really thought about it, until they're in that situation that they just don't think about it, I guess. And I guess a lot of people, when they like think about their pets themselves, they might have family or friends, but there's a lot of people that don't have family or friends for support as well. So I still don't think it's widely known about, or I think a lot of there's still a lot of education needed.
Sure. Yeah. And how about from your perspective, Monique?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question, and I think it really does depend a lot. Sometimes we'll speak to workers who've been across this issue for a very long time, for decades, and for decades they've tried to find really innovative ways to support people with animals and women and children with animals by connecting in with their local services, trying to find if there is a local animal rescue or shelter that might support the animals of women and children experiencing domestic and family violence. On the other hand, just last week, I was speaking to someone who was a caseworker in a homelessness service, and she expressed that, when she first came across the issue, it was completely new for her. She hadn't been aware of it before, and that there's still so much work that needs to be done in order to improve access to supports for people and animals experiencing violence. She recalled that often at the service she worked at, that when people called and they did express that they have animals they're concerned about, but their expectation would be that they would leave the animals behind in order to be able to access the service. And I think something that needs a lot of attention, and it would be incredible if those of you who are with us today could think about recording data when people are turned away from services because the service is not able to accommodate them. Because whenever I have spoken with government and non-government services that provide supports for people and people experiencing domestic and family violence, the caseworkers are saying there are people who will decline services, who will decline support because they're not able to be assisted together with their animals. And I'm not sure if anywhere we're really capturing that data.
It's a really practical point and call to action. Was someone else going to add something there? Did I cut you off, Jen?
No, that's okay. I was going to say that we have done a little bit of feedback surveys in just asking like what people would have done if they didn't have our services, and I can't give the exact number, but I do know majority of people said they wouldn't. There's no way they would have left if they couldn't take their animals with them. So it does. Yeah, I think it's very important data to capture, because there's so many people that if they don't even think there's a service available, they won't even think about leaving.
That's a really important point to raise. Thank you, Jen. All right, folks, we've covered what the practice issue is, what violence against family animals looks like in this context. We've talked about this being a barrier to accessing supports or to leaving a violent situation. I wonder if we could now shift the focus to insights that you might be able to share to improve the quality of support that practitioners might provide families. So I'm going to ask you to speak next, Kylie, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no worries. So, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I get really excited about qualitative research, is because you get some really great insights that, you know, it can only really be captured by having those kind of in-depth conversations with people. And there were a lot of recommendations about improving support, or also just where there are gaps in support that came out of the literature. So I'm just going to pick a couple of them because there's not enough time to talk to everything. But this kind of goes back to what Jen and Monique have mentioned before about women being a bit hesitant or not wanting to disclose abuse against family animals, and that often they wouldn't do so unless they were asked directly. So there were a few reasons behind this that came out of the research evidence. One being that there's a fear that practitioners won't understand the importance of the animals in their lives or take the abuse seriously because it's happening to an animal and not a person. It was also in one of the newer papers that came out this year, so since we produced our publication, talking about women being afraid that if they do disclose abuse happening to their animals, that they'll be separated they'll be separated from their animals, either the animal being relinquished to a service or being, you know, forced or pressured to leave the situation and leave the animal behind because how dangerous the situation is in the home. There's also another point here, is that perpetrators often make women feel as though the abuse happening to the animals is their fault. So there's a lot of guilt or shame experienced by people about not being able to protect their animals, and that the animal is also experiencing violence in the home, which is another factor that can impact whether people will speak openly about what's happening. So from these points, one of the things that came through, which Monique's already mentioned, is that importance of including questions about animals at intakes, of asking people about, you know, trying to get a really full picture of what's happening in the home and directly asking about animals. There's also just very, you know, broadly a need for more support with animal inclusive risk assessment, and safety planning was something that a lot of women felt would really help them. Especially so if they're considering leaving a relationship. So this could be things like, you know, safety checklists, thinking about what they would need to take if they can leave and take their pet with them. And also a need for just more streamlined information about where support can be accessed, what type of animal inclusive support is available. So those are some of the key things that came up about areas where the quality of support that people receive could be strengthened.
And Kylie, with that practical checklist, it sounds like you're talking about things just like collars or leashes or blankets and bedding, these kinds of things.
Yeah, also, if you've got a pet that's on medication, just think about what are those essential things that you would need to take with you in the moment.
Awesome. Thank you, Kylie. Jan, could you add to this in thinking about ways that supports could be improved for families leaving violent situations?
Yeah. So I did touch base on it a little bit before around thinking about, like, because I guess, like, from our perspective, when we're providing foster care, we, like, animals that are not desexed are much harder to place with foster carers. So and I guess that there is resources out there of, like, free desexing programs and stuff, like, and we actually are in the middle of updating our website, and we're going to have a resource on there that will highlight a lot of these services around Australia. So we've been putting together, I've had a team of social workers been working with us, and we've been sort of mapping out Australia and just seeing what services are available to people. So hopefully that will go live really soon. It's something that we're really excited about. And I guess there's like, if you need to access, like, emergency boarding, obviously vaccinations are really important. So I guess the questions about animals needs to happen really early. Like, it needs to be one of the first questions that happen, or communication that happens, because I guess, yeah, like, but basically we fail to save people when we don't include animals. And I guess these questions are really important at the start, to know the status of the animal. Like, are they desexed? Are they vaccinated? Are they friendly? And just knowing, like, the options, because, like, it's sort of, yeah, you need to have, like, a bit of a multi-layered response, I guess. Like, not every shelter is going to be pet friendly. Not every person is going to go into a shelter. They might be going to a motel. There's all different circumstances. So it is a very case by case sort of situation sometimes. And so I guess, like, asking those key questions, and once you know those answers to those key questions, then you can start thinking of solutions, I guess. Yeah, and you can even, like, for shelters and stuff as well, you can definitely connect with your local vets and things like that as well, and maybe ask the question, like, do they have capacity to help in an emergency situation for 48 hours or something? Or I guess, like, when someone's ready to leave, sometimes there's a very small window, and so sometimes it might be good to get those pets out straight away, so you remove any of those barriers, of those risks. And yeah, I think that's important.
Really practical, and really thinking about that creatively about the resources that could be drawn on there. That's it's interesting. If I reflect on my own mental health and social work training, we did genograms of families, and animals were never included. And until recently, that's something that I never really questioned, even though I always grew up with animals and had really close attachments to them myself. So you can see how they're this invisible dynamic within the family, that if that's not included from the start, there's a lot that we're going to miss. And a big part of the human clients that we're working with, and their emotional and physical well-being, is being missed. And like each of you have raised, means that potentially missing the opportunity for disclosure and important conversations to reduce the risk for people.
Yeah, I might just add that lately, like, we've been so some part of our team, we've got a social worker who's doing some extra studies at the moment, and we're sort of I guess we've been looking at the concept of veterinary social work for a long time now, and we've been putting it into practice, and we've been providing social services for a long time for people and pets in crisis. But veterinary social work, there's, like, an extra course that people can do, like a postgrad certificate for social workers, and it's just learning about the human animal bond. It's pretty much as simple as that, and it just really empowers you to incorporate animals into your practice, because, like, when you are becoming a social worker, but not just a social worker, anyone in human services or social services, like, to be able to have that person-centered approach, or that holistic approach, it's like you got to care about the things that people care about as well. So you need to care about the animals that people care about, to be able to give them a full service. I think it's really important to validate people's feelings and yeah, really reach what they care about. And yeah, the animals are so important to people that are going through trauma and experiencing a crisis.
That sounds like a real call for a holistic approach, a family systems approach, and making sure animals are included in that. Yeah. Mon, I'd like to invite you to add to the discussion here, picking back, continuing the thread of ways to improve support for family and animals.
And thank you so much for everything you've shared, Kylie and Jen. I definitely agree and just want to reiterate that people may not disclose that they live with animals or that they have those fears and concerns unless they're directly asked during the intake process and throughout the process of supporting them as well. And this is why it's so critical that animals are included and that animal abuse is asked about during risk assessment, because there might be additional risks, there might be high risks to the safety of women and children and the animals that need to be addressed as part of that safety planning process. And it is important to ask about different kinds of animals too, because I know that in some states and territories, the risk assessment, the standard risk assessment forms or approaches do vary, and sometimes they do only refer to companion animals or pets. But as I mentioned earlier, violence might be perpetrated against assistance animals as well. For people living in outer metropolitan and regional areas, violence might also be perpetrated against farmed and wild animals. And all of that is important to ask about to really build a full picture of the risks to that family, to the women and children and the animals as well. And as I did mention earlier, Lucy's project is offering free education sessions. These are some of the things that we cover, including animal inclusive risk assessment and safety planning. And you can sign up for that via the links in the handouts and the chat box as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Monique. I think we have a really solid foundation here with the points that we've covered to now shift to some of the questions that are coming through from the audience. Thank you for your amazing questions coming through. You can see a lot of engagement with the things that our brilliant group are sharing today. I want to pick up on this thread that's around the legal side of the situations that folks are facing. So one of the questions we have from the audience is about information that we can share when it comes to the legal side of these situations. And this is something that we briefly spoke about when we were planning for the webinar, because registration questions also were related to this area. And it felt like the conclusion that we came to was that it's very complex. It's quite a challenging aspect of practice. I would like maybe to throw to you first, Monique, if you could get us started. What are some of the key issues and challenges that you think are important for the audience to be aware of in terms of the legal components here?
Yeah, so there are lots of different legal issues that can arise when domestic and family violence has been perpetrated against people and animals. And that's why it's so critical to support women and children to disclose if there is violence happening against animals and to seek legal advice wherever possible, to understand what legal protections are available as well as what other legal issues need to be addressed as part of the safety planning and support. There are differences in each state and territory in terms of how people and animals can be protected under domestic and family violence legislation. In New South Wales, animal abuse is recognised as a form of coercive control, which is a criminal offence as of the 1st of July this year. Perpetrators of violence against animals may also be able to be charged with animal cruelty offences. And again, legislation around animal cruelty does vary across the different jurisdictions. Under the law, animals are considered property, and perpetrators may claim legal ownership of the animals as another way to exert power and control. And some of you may have heard that the Commonwealth Attorney General has proposed changes to the Family Law Act. And these changes would require family law courts to consider any history of actual or threatened cruelty or abuse towards a companion animal when they're making decisions about companion animals as a form of property. But they would, the draft or the bill that's been proposed, it would also require the family law courts to take into account other factors like who paid for the care of the animal. And since we know that perpetrators use economic and financial abuse, we really think that the proposed law or the changes that are made to the Family Law Act should be focused on ensuring that the safety of women and children and animals is the most important consideration when family law courts are making decisions about animals as a form of property.
Yeah, thank you, Monique. Jen, are there other points that you'd like to add from the experiences that you've had?
Yeah, so we've definitely come up with lots of situations where like just the microchips and the registration and then conflicts between microchips and registration as well. So like with like whether the registration for a council is actually the true or accurate owner, or a microchip is the true accurate owner. And so these are some things. It's a good point, because like in that planning process as well, it's probably a good question to see whether the animal is microchipped and who it's microchipped to or who it's registered to. So then there could be some room to hopefully make some changes or microchip the animal. But yeah, it is a complex area around ownerships, and because pets are classed as property as well, it does make it complicated sometimes, because it's a bit more of a civil sort of case sometimes, I believe. But yeah, it's definitely something that comes up all the time, especially with microchips and registration.
It's important, I think, for there's certain concrete things we can share throughout the discussion, but just normalizing that it is complex, that this is tricky, and working with families is tricky. Adding animals adds another aspect to this. So all of those insights are really valued. I am having a look at the chat, and I'm seeing people are really excited, Jen, about the veterinary social work. And they're Googling and trying to find out where they could find more information about this. Do you have any further info that you can share where would be good for people to have a look? Some folks are saying they can see it's available in, I think it was maybe in some courses in Queensland, but could you share any other info about that?
So the course that our team were doing was the one that was in America. It's the Kentucky Tennessee University, I think it's called. And it's a postgrad certificate that you can do. We are getting some changes coming here. It isn't quite available here yet though, but there is, like, in the University of Adelaide, there was a human animal bond course with I think there was something available in that uni, but I can share some things afterwards if that's available or not. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but people
absolutely.
can definitely reach out to Safe Pets, Safe Families, and we can send. I don't mind people reaching out and for resources. That's fine as well. But yeah, when our website goes live, like the updates, it will all be on there. So that should be happening in the next couple of weeks. Yeah.
Lovely. So yeah, feel free to reach out, and we'll follow up with that information. It's really it's a real delight to see people interested in that and wanting more information there. Okay, my gosh, it's 1:48, folks. The time has gone so quickly. Your passion and your knowledge is, I feel very privileged to have this conversation, and I can see from the chat the engagement that folks at home or sitting in their offices are also very engaged. So just a pause to reflect on that for a sec. Okay, I think the next thing I'd like to do is to pick up on one of the lines of inquiry from the chat that's about referral pathways. So the audience have kind of raised this question of how can they identify animal-friendly services to link the families that they're supporting with those services. This was kind of interesting for us, Kylie, right? While we were doing the research, often at the end of CFCA resources, we like to have a link of where people can go to, and we found this quite tricky Do you kind of care to expand on that?
We did. So, yeah, as you mentioned, we wanted to include a list of those resources or support services at the end of our publication. We spent quite a long time searching state by state for programs, kind of looking specifically for programs that could help both people and pets who are experiencing intimate partner related violence where there was animal abuse occurring as well. The majority of what we found were fostering services for animals, so RSPCA programs or programs run by other animal rescue or welfare organizations that could help with temporary accommodation for pets of people experiencing violence. And we know that these services are so valuable. We also know that these services are often really limited in their capacity, and a lot of animal welfare organizations are volunteer run as well. What we couldn't find was any kind of comprehensive directory or list that kind of shed a bit more light about which domestic, family and sexual violence services could help with referral or included animals, had animal inclusive aspects to the support that they could offer. Yeah, when I was looking at this, I kind of wondered if I was missing something, but what I also thought about was that if I was struggling to find this information, it's likely that practitioners may also not quite know where to look. And it also made me think about how difficult it must be for people that are experiencing this to kind of work out even where to begin with trying to access formal supports, or even just knowing what or if anything is available out there.
That's a really good point, because we have the calmness of the lovely aifs office to sit and to deep dive and do focused work on this, and we found it tricky to find information. So that empathy and perspective taking you take there, Kylie, is really important when people are trying to find information quickly and they're at a risk of danger. We need to make information really accessible and really easy to find. Yeah. Well, I think in your work, you've similarly found that it's not clear which services exist and how to access them. I'm wondering if you might kind of share the lessons that you and your team have learned in the process and some tips for the audience to keep in mind.
Thank you, Jazz. Definitely. I think there's just so much more work to be done. At Lucy's project, we'll continue to advocate for domestic and family violence services to be able to support people with animals across Australia, as well as for animal welfare services to be able to care for animals who are not able to be housed together with their families until they can be reunited safely. For example, I think one of the reasons why it can feel like it's really hard to find services that will support people and animals is because they are far and few between. In New South Wales, following some advocacy by Domestic Violence New South Wales and Lucy's Project and other key organisations and politicians, the New South Wales government committed to making new refuges animal inclusive, and some of those refuges have now been completed. So these are the core and cluster refuges that those of you in New South Wales may know of. And it's really exciting to see that more women and children can now access the supports they need to be safe together with their animals. And we're really keen to see all new refuges across the country being built to be more animal inclusive, and for existing refuges to be supported to be more animal inclusive too. But until that happens, there is a lot that individual services can do. And it's been incredible to, some of the services we've engaged with in the past to learn about the work that they've done to collaborate with local councils, to collaborate with animal welfare organisations, with veterinary services, as Jen suggested earlier, to really think of creative solutions to support people and animals experiencing violence. And if, for instance, we've previously worked with a DV service to connect them with their local council-run animal shelter. And the animal shelter had come across this issue before, in terms of they were aware of people and animals experiencing domestic and family violence. And so when there was this kind of opportunity to collaborate with their local DV service, they were very happy and moved quite quickly to put in place systems to provide emergency housing for animals experiencing domestic and family violence. And we were able to support that service, the domestic violence service and the animal shelter, to set up that partnership and to put in place some policies and processes and think about the safety considerations too. But of course, you know, without us having been involved, there are many services who are doing this already, and it's just incredible to see the passion of practitioners for making sure that people and animals can access the supports they need to be safe.
Thank you, Monique. Really appreciate that. Lots of really important points that you've made there. Jen, is there anything else you'd like to add to that and thinking about referral pathways?
Yeah, so I guess we get lots of interstate callers. So even though we are in SA, we get lots of interstate callers, and we did a lot of work in like mapping out a lot of what we could find, and then I've had some social work students work with us at the moment to do that mapping, and so we are building a resource to be able to do that. But I guess in SA, we do provide those services. We provide foster services, we provide vet care and emergency boarding, and all the services that I guess that people and pets in crisis need. We were fortunate enough to just recently get a contract where we are going to be working over the next 3 years to help DV shelters become pet friendly, and sometimes there might be some services that might not necessarily be able to have pets on site, but being pet friendly is not always about having pets on site. It might be other things that places can do as well. So I definitely encourage anyone in SA that is in a DV shelter, because we're going to be working with a lot of DV shelters in SA, and then with the view to expand to Australia-wide eventually, and that's to help DV shelters to resource them to become pet friendly. So it's a similar project that was in America that works with an organisation over there, and the same funding body, and they've come to Australia, so with the view to expand. So that was something really exciting, and it's only sort of just happened. So yeah, definitely reach out and see what we can do. Yeah, so it's definitely needed, because even we were finding it hard as well to find places, because we had so many interstate callers and so many services ringing us, and yeah, we actually struggled as well at the start to find services available. Yeah, and like Monique said, they are far and few between as well.
Sure, yeah. What a fantastic project, and fantastic output to be created, and really great experience for those students to be involved with as well. That's really cool, Jen. You mentioned the word mapping, and that has triggered my brain to bring up something from the chat. One of our practitioners in the audience is suggesting in thinking laterally, that you could look at motel mapping databases and filter by which ones might allow pets, and that could be a good kind of short-term solution. This is a really nice tip. Appreciate that from one of our audience members. I was at a talk yesterday by Jocelyn, the CEO of Macaulay, and would just note one of the points that she mentioned was that at times where there's big race events or sporting or music events, that sometimes these resources aren't accessible, so to keep that in mind as well, but otherwise a really handy one to think about. So yeah, thanks again. Good to crowdsource information. We probably need to round out. It's been a fantastic conversation. I wonder if I could get you to go around. I might start with Kylie, and if you could just really briefly, it could be reiterating or it could be a new point. What's a key takeaway that you'd like the audience to take from today?
I think a key takeaway for me, and something I thought about constantly while I was doing this research, is how much it highlights the importance of family animals in people's lives. And we probably think a lot more about the benefits, and there are so many benefits, and we should be thinking about these, but there can also be extra challenges or costs that come from having and caring for family animals, especially in a situation like an intimate partner violence situation. And I think I just want to say that what I've learned from the research is just how important it is to recognize that violence against family animals can be a red flag to other forms of abuse happening in the home, and that if we can include animals in care plans, take disclosure of animal abuse seriously, think about how different sectors can work together a bit more, but just from a very general level, include pets in conversations, because these can be really valuable starting points to supporting people, to building relationships with people, and to helping both people and their animals be safer and feel supported.
Amazing. Thank you, Kylie. Jen, key takeaway from you today?
Yeah, I guess it's just highlighting how important I think I've said in earlier conversations before as well that because we work with a lot of like mental health workers from hospital and other things and whatever, and sometimes we get feedback because like when you care about someone's pet, it's almost like it's an extension of that person, and like so you build rapport really quickly with people when you care about their pets, something so important to them. And I think it's just yeah, out the box thinking as well. I'd like to add that just think out the box. I think the whole of Safe Pets, Safe Families was sort of designed on out the box thinking, and it's been so successful in supporting people and pets, and really just having a go at finding solutions for people and their pets. I think that's so important. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Jen. And Mon, your final takeaway for the audience today?
I just that it's so important to adopt an animal inclusive response to domestic and family violence, and keeping in mind that if animals are at risk, then women and children are at risk. The safety of people and animals is interconnected.
Lovely. Thank each of you for your time today. Absolute privilege and lovely to have a combination of such insights and experience. We really appreciate it. Again, I just want to shout out to the audience. This is recorded. It'll be available in 2 weeks. Please take the time to fill out the survey at the end so that we can incorporate what works for you and the things that you're interested in and the formats you're interested in the webinars that we create. I'd like to thank the aifs team behind the scenes that make this possible. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us, the audience today. You're the reason we create these webinars, and we really hope it was useful. And we'll see you next time. Hey there, folks. Thank you for joining us for the extended Q&A, and thank you to the panel for taking more time to discuss with us. We have worked through the questions that have come through. We didn't get a chance to have a look at in the live webinar, and there were 2 points that we thought grouped together the remaining questions quite nicely. We want to talk a little bit more about the impact of experiencing intimate partner violence, where there's also violence against family animals, for the impact both on women and children and on the animals, but also to start talking about the that kind of road to recovery and healing and what that looks like. So that's our kind of broad theme for this extended Q&A. I'm going to get you to get us started, Kylie.
No worries. So the research literature didn't look as much into healing and recovery, and I think that highlights another gap and something that would be really valuable to learn more about, like what happens next. But there were some insights into the impacts on animals and some of those impacts of trauma on animals. And I can speak to that a bit from the research literature, but also from the experience I have working in animal rescue. One of the things that can complicate or make it more complex for people to leave a relationship and find a safe place with their animals is that animals that experience trauma often have quite complex behavioral and medical needs. And not all animals will experience this, but it can be fairly common. And this can look like things such as aggression, which might be fear-based aggression. It might look like them trying to protect their human. Avoidance and fear. So you might find that some animals have fear of people with certain characteristics. So say if it's a male perpetrator of intimate partner violence or a male that's abused the animal in the past, they might be afraid of men or men of certain builds or appearances. You see a lot of anxiety, especially separation anxiety from that human that they feel the most close connection with. There can also be increased medical needs from injuries, Also, some more basic health needs like dental care is quite a common one as well. And all these things can just make it that little bit trickier to find suitable support and accommodation for an animal. And what this means is that, you just might need to think quite carefully about who can take care of the animal if it does need to go into temporary accommodation. Not all shelters or kennels may be appropriate. You may need people with certain skill sets. There may need to be additional support with behaviour or with basic supplies and things for animals as well. So these are just additional things to think about when looking at how this situation impacts animals and what kind of the whole like wraparound or holistic supports that you might need to ensure that people and animals are safe, and the best scenarios for both, which ideally is where they can be kept together and go through that healing and recovery journey together.
Yeah, thank you, Kylie. That's, those useful insights of understanding why in adopting animals, why we might see some of those behaviours and how that can be tricky as well for folks. Leaning into or thinking about that, recovering together, Jen, I wonder if I might be able to throw to you to share your experience.
Yeah, so I've obviously got personal experience in with what I've gone through in losing my pets, and it for me, like it's sort of has never left me. I've always been heartbroken. I feel like which this obviously is a very touching subject, so it does make me cry. But I do feel like I failed my animals because I had them when they were puppies, and at the time when I left the DV relationship, they were 8 years old at the time, and so I sort of feel like that they should have sort of died of old age at home, not sort of end up at the pound and euthanized, and I feel responsible for that I failed to protect them and failed to sort of provide for them, I guess, and I guess that's why I started Safe Pets, Safe Families, because I didn't want anyone else to experience what I did. And for my children as well, the impacts of my children, they were like my dogs were my kids' first best friends, and they were there for everything as well. And I guess speaking more broadly on the effects of like children and pets as well, like children are quite connected from pets from a young age, from like watching cartoons or movies, and sometimes in a home with sort of intergenerational violence or poverty, their pets sometimes, like little toddlers that are starting to walk, like lean on the dogs and things like that. So they are very connected, and I've always said that I would have healed 10 times faster if I was able to take my pets with me and have my pets with me. And I feel like that is the case with every client that I come in contact with. And even though with when we have pets in foster care and we provide visits and updates and photos, it's still not the same as when they are together. And it's sort of and I think like we do sort of aftercare, like after an animal has returned home, we do a little bit of outreach with people because there's still so much more support that is needed, sometimes around behaviour issues, sometimes with financial issues, and so there is a lot of time needed for recovery and healing, and it is important to be able to factor in these pets as well.
Jen, thank you for sharing your experience with us. You now, because of the initiatives that you've set up, you now are in a position to see where families get to stay together. Are there any kind of reflections you want to finish off with there?
Yeah. This one, it's gonna make me cry. Like a long time ago, like when I first started the foster program, like I had my dogs were a Staffy and a Roddy, and like one of the first dogs that we fostered, it was a Roddy cross Staffy, and it might sound really weird, but like the dog, it looked like a Staffy, like my dog, and then it had the little stupid Roddy dog turn that like Roddies do, and it was almost like that this dog, it was like that, it was, sounds so crazy, but it was like my dogs were like coming through this dog, like saying thank you sort of thing. And I guess like every time we have a successful return home and you just see the kids so excited and everyone's so excited to be reunited with their pets, it's just, yeah, it's the most amazing gift. And I guess that's what drives, that's what drives us at Safe Pets Safe Families to keep going, because the reuniting people with their pets is just so amazing. And even just that, the healing and just that itself is amazing. But yeah, I've got tears running down my face. It's
Yeah,
important.
you choked
It's
me up a
important
little
to
bit
people.
too, Jen. Thank you for
Yeah.
showing the human part of what we're talking about here, because I think sometimes we can talk about research and we can talk about issues, and to have front of mind the human aspect, and remember that everyone's experience is unique, and that there are different these long-term impacts of these experiences. So very much value your time and your willingness to share. Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, definitely.
Mon, can I throw to you to round out, thinking about any further insights you might like to share with impacts for children, women, and animals, or any comments you might want to make around healing and recovery?
Thank you so much, Jazz and Kylie, and thank you, Jen, again for all the incredible work that you do. I really just wanted to reflect on the really special relationship that people can have with their animals, particularly if they are experiencing domestic and family violence at the same time and together. We hear about the ways in which people seek to protect their animals. That can include women trying to protect their animals, but also children and young people too. I think back of a story someone shared with me where children would hide their birds before their father would return home because they were concerned that their birds were going to be harmed. So that kind of gives you an insight into the level of fear that women and children can have, that their animals are going to be harmed. We often will receive inquiries from people in the community who are experiencing violence, women who are choosing to live out of their cars with their children and animals because they're not able to find a service that can support them. And sometimes they do let us know that they're concerned for their safety because it's not safe for them to be living out of their car. Recently, we also were contacted by someone who really wanted to find support where they could be housed together with their animals. And this woman expressed that for her and her children, they had already given up so much to try to find safety, and they couldn't bear the thought of being separated and forced to give up their animals as well, who they love so much. And as Jen mentioned, for many children and young people who are experiencing violence, and for women as well, the relationship they have with their animals, that might be their one safe place. That might be, animals provide that unconditional love and that no judgment as well, and they're there for them. And we also hear of stories where animals are trying to protect children and young people and trying to protect women when they are seeing that there is violence being perpetrated against them. And this is why if we're able to support women and children and animals to stay together and to be able to heal and recover together, that can be really powerful. Otherwise, if women and children are forced to be separated from their animals, that just adds a whole nother layer of trauma, anxiety, and grief because of that immense loss of losing so much and also losing the animals they love as well. And I really want to thank everyone again for making the time to join us for the webinar, and I'd love for you to get in touch with us. We always are keen to hear the stories of practitioners, the challenges that you're facing in trying to provide that support for people and animals to be safe together, because we know that it's a lot of structural change, a lot of systems changes that are needed. And we're keen to share your stories with politicians, with policymakers, so they can understand, what needs to change to support you as practitioners and services to be able to better support people and animals experiencing violence. Whether that's making sure there is more emergency crisis and transitional accommodation available that will accommodate people with animals, whether that means changing rental laws so that people with animals can find somewhere together to call home.
It's a nice call to action to finish on, Monique. Thanks, Kylie. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Monique, for taking the time for this extra reflection and sharing of insights in the extended Q&A. And thanks for those of you who are watching. We hope that you have found it useful, and wishing you all the best in the work that you do supporting families.